Time for a change. Let me hear you scream. Let me hear you really scream. Send George Bush back to Texas. Scream one more time. Let me express my thanks and delight for this opportunity to be with you today. The Brother Gray for such a kind, generous, and brief introduction. To remind you that on January 27th, there will be a major demonstration in Washington to end the war. I've been asked to both integrate some of our memories and relations with Dr. King and deal in the context of this tremendous free press session today. It's clear to me that today too few people own too much media and therefore attempt to control our minds and privileges at the expense of our rights. The reason why Vince Young in Texas can upset Reggie Bush and USC, or LSU can beat Notre Dame in the big game, or Florida can upset Ohio State in the big game, it's because you do not win those games based upon inheritance. You don't win them based upon legacy or future speculation. Whenever the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear, anybody can win. And that is America at its best, an even playing field, where we have the right to agree or disagree but be heard. When have you last heard on a Sunday news show the leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, a leader of NOW, a leader of Latino organizations? When have you heard from one of those voices lately? Or last time you've heard or seen a farmer on a Sunday television show? We're fighting the war in part driven by war and about energy. Detroit now has the capacity to provide ethanol to replace so much of the Middle East dependency. But big oil companies will not convert to ethanol at the pump. Family farmers ought to have something to say about that. The 100 largest cities are majority black and brown. And yet, no black or Latino mayor has a place in that space called network or cable television. We're fighting a war built on a false foundation. We're losing lives and money and honor. The president is in a hole looking for a shovel rather than a rope, digging a deeper hole. He wants to. America says, reduce the war and end it. He says, give me one more shot at expanding it. So I want more money and more troops and identifying more foes as a key to ending it. He's a war addict. He needs a kind of methadone. He should be weaned from this war. If on that football field, if on a given Sunday afternoon, if the owner employed the referees and made the score clock, and his son was the scorekeeper, you couldn't trust the outcome. If on a given Sunday afternoon, I watch games sometime when the Bears play the Green Bay Packers, and you see whites from Green Bay when it's snowing, and before global warming, when it's snowing and cold, and those white guys, I mean, real unapologetic white guys with no T-shirt on, beer in one hand, cigar in the mouth, cheese on the head, real serious white guys, pulling for a black guy from Green Bay to knock out a white quarterback from Chicago, if you can find one. And you see blacks from Chicago, I mean, real serious, down with it, my brother kind of blacks, pulling for white guys from Chicago to knock out black guys from Green Bay. What allows in that setting for whites from Green Bay, blacks from Chicago, to rise above their racial fears and their racial paradigm and choose uniform color over skin color, to choose regional interests over racial fears and biases? Because when the playing field is even and the rules are public and the goals are clear, we can go to the next level. But if blacks had to run 12 yards for a first down because they had to prove something extra, and whites had to run 7 yards for a first down because they inherited some yards, the lack of fairness will leave a sense of bitterness in everybody's mouth. And that's why this American goal of equal opportunity and equal access and fairness is the key to peace. Dr. King's birthday will be celebrated this coming Monday. When we romanticize Dr. King's journey, we distort history. Served just 13 years, perhaps America's most hated man in life. He was hated by so many whites and shunned by so many blacks. The National Baptist Convention, his own convention, in effect expelled him. He was controversial. He went counterculture. He challenged white male supremacy. As he fought for women's rights and workers' rights and racial justice, he disturbed the status quo, which upset slaves and masters, the segregators and the segregated. All had to adjust to his challenges. He challenged the unfair tax structure. He said if the rich just got richer slower, the poor could be lifted by a fair tax structure. He challenged 95-year-old state laws. You know, the right to vote was granted in 1870, implemented in 1965 with federal intervention, which the right wing called interposition. He knew that the legacy of slavery was still quite deep. After all, we got the 13th Amendment by just 2 votes. He challenged the war and its priorities, shifting from war on policy to a war in Vietnam. He challenged privilege at the expense of rights. He was idolized by the white media when he absorbed the blows. When whites bombed his home in Montgomery, he told blacks not to shoot back. They said, this is our guy. When dogs bit and horses kicked, and he said, don't fight back, they said, this is the kind of leader we've been looking for. But when he challenged the assumptions of white male supremacy, its institutions, and our war policy, the government then began to attack him. Indicted in 1957 for income tax evasion. He won that battle. It was just a political hit. For traffic tickets, he was convicted in Atlanta and sent to Reedsville Penitentiary about traffic tickets. He was bricked, hit in the head with bricks in Chicago, marching for open housing. Stabbed in New York, shot in Memphis. But what happened in Memphis could have happened in Chicago. It could have happened in New York. 13 years of turbulence, of jail cells and bricks and stabbings and gunshots. When we romanticize him and reduce it to just he had a dream, we take away the edge of the struggle that he engaged in, the struggle that remains today. he connected history. I would argue that he did not give the I have a dream speech. That was not his point. There were no signs in that march that day talking about I have a dream. That was the alliterative, poetic climax to try to lift our spirits above our predicament. That day, those who came from as far southwest as Texas across to Florida, up to southern Maryland, could not use a single public toilet. Our money was counterfeited. We could not buy ice cream at Howard Johnson's. We couldn't rent a room at the Holiday Inn. My high school senior class could not take pictures on the lawn of the state capitol, but dogs could. And so he spoke about a broken promise. It really was the broken promise speech. That carries with it some challenge and some budget. He said, here we stand at the foot of Lincoln's monument. Lincoln, you promised Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. Congress, you promised it with the 13th Amendment. But here we stand today with appetites, money, can't eat and can't buy food. Here we stand today, and we can't vote. Here we stand today, 95 years later. It was not until 1965 the government intervened to implement an 1870 law, the state's right to vote. We still do not have a federal right to vote. We only have the state's right to vote. It was about the broken promise. It said, now, a nation so powerful and so rich, so powerful, so rich, so powerful, so rich, so powerful, so rich. You can't convince me that we cannot protect the interests of all of our citizens. So he talked about this promissory note, the balance marked insufficient funds. That was a poetic transition. The speech was about the broken promise. That's why we're sitting here today, even progressives, why we're sitting here today, so white, so few blacks and browns, but we're still trying to bring down those barriers, to build these bridges to make this a more perfect union. I remember so well in our last staff meeting on January 15, 1968. And I referred to that day because as we celebrated on this coming Monday, is it consistent with his spirit? That morning, he had breakfast with his family around 8 o'clock that morning. Around 10, he came to the church, blue jeans on, the windbreaker jacket, sports shirt, and he convened some African Americans from deep South Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, some whites from Appalachia, some Native Americans, Al Lowenstein, some Jewish allies from New York, some labor leaders, some Latinos from some of Chavez group from Southwest Texas. We had never really worked together before. He was convinced there was not going to be development for one unless it was for all, and so he was trying to build us into an operative rainbow coalition, as it were. We spent that morning focused on how to end poverty, how to create a floor beneath which no American would fall, no senior would fall, no child would be left uneducated. A march for a job, an income, health care, education for every American. And preparing to go to Washington to march and engage in civil disobedience, prepared to go to jail for a long time, to break federal statutes. Let's go to jail at the foothill of the White House and Congress, focusing Congress' attention on poverty, literacy, and disease. Spending his own birthday. Around noon time, Zanona Clayton brought in a cake, his friend, and said, Doc, you work so hard, you forget your own birthday. Then she brought a small cake and some punch. We stopped and we ate it. We had some measured celebration. And then that afternoon, Al Lowenstein began to conduct a workshop on how to end the war in Vietnam. He felt strongly that monies designed for the war on poverty had gone to the war in Vietnam. It was an unwinnable war and could not be justified. He spent his own birthday, therefore, at home with family, a basement of church working on how to end poverty, building a coalition, measured celebration, and then how to end the war. What would he be doing today consistent with that? With 50 million Americans without health insurance, the loss of 3 million middle-class jobs, exporting jobs and capital, importing cheaply made products and first-class jails and second-class schools. The radical gap between the wealthy surplus and the middle class sinking and the poor in the deficit. What would he be doing today? That Saturday before we came to Memphis, because as fighting against the war and for poverty was under attack. Some members of our board were attacking, saying his going to Washington was too risky. The government attacked him, saying he didn't understand foreign policy. And he was shifting focus from civil rights to something called the war, and that was out of our domain. He said, when I said that blacks shouldn't shoot whites back, and I said that when dogs bite us, forgive them, you said I was a great guy. I was against whites shooting blacks. I was against blacks shooting whites. I'm against blacks and whites shooting Vietnamese. We've lost 55,000 Americans and 3 million Vietnamese. I'm against people killing people. And so I'm not going to change, and I will be heard. I'm not going to change, and I will be heard. I'm not going to change, and I will be heard, he said. And that Saturday morning, he convened us to come to Atlanta. Most of us were around the country. We really didn't want to come because we were tired of doing other projects. And so Dr. Abner said, come urgently, Martin wants to talk with you. So we came reluctantly, but we came because of what we were doing. And he said, as we gathered in the study in the Atlanta office, he said, I've been with Andy and his wife, Jean, and Ralph, and Juanita, and my wife for about 3 days, off and on. I have a migraine headache. I'm not eating very much. I'm very down by the burden of this struggle and how people are turning on people, and the press, the government, and my allies are turning on me. And I thought honestly about quitting, about turning around. I've done a lot of work in 13 years. We now have a public accommodations bill. We now have the right to vote. We've now given our struggle global stature. Maybe I've done as much as I could do. He said I could become president of Morehouse College. I could write books, maybe preach at Riverside, give lectures. He said, but then I couldn't turn around because Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and others wouldn't understand. They wouldn't accept me, so I can't go back. Then said, maybe our movement is so divided on tactics. Maybe if I fasted to the point of death, maybe that Floyd McKissick and Jim Farmer and Roy Wilkins and Whitney Young and Stokely and Rapp and John Lewis, we may disagree in some instances, but we're friends. They would come by my bedside just before I died, maybe save me from death, and we could reunify our common struggle. And then he said, Andy said, Doc, don't talk that way. He said, Andy, be quiet. Don't say peace, peace, when there is no peace. Let me finish. And we got real quiet. He said, but you know, we're going to turn the minus into a plus. We're going on to Memphis. Like we came out of Albany, Georgia, we're going on to Memphis and fight for these garbage workers. We're not giving up. We're going to fight poverty. We're going to fight the war. We're going on to Memphis. It's like he preached himself out of a depression on that high note. The parallel was Jesus saying, let this cup pass from me. Maybe I can't go any further. As he prayed, his disciples slept. And then, not my will, but thine be done. What a poetic meeting that Sunday morning before coming here to Memphis on that following week. So he leads us today to the challenge of choosing coalition over coexistence, coalition over co-annihilation, and polarization. He brings us to this point today, 40 years later, to define the great issues of our time. The broken promises, the new schemes of denial, the impact of a media that freezes out democracy, a media that looks at the world through a keyhole and not through a door, and sometimes fingers in that keyhole. He challenges us today to see and to hear and speak the word. In the beginning was the word, no world. And so our word has been cut off. Our word has been cut off. And our world is being limited. Our word has been cut off. The world is being limited. I'm with the civil rights struggle, but I'm against affirmative action. Well, You're not against the GI Bill, biggest affirmative action program, understandably so. I'm with the struggle, but now this EEOC and contract compliance, just honor the law and keep the playing field even. I met a young lady on an airplane a couple of weeks ago. I was coming from South Carolina to visit my mother, and she was very generous, this flight attendant. She said, the plane is in flight, may I talk with you? I said, yes, ma'am. She came back, she said, you seem to be a kind of a nice fellow, unlike your image. You don't appear to be so controversial. And I said, what are you really saying? Well, you know, it's like, you know, it's just controversy. So I said, I'm honored. You can't shake the dirt out of stuff that you have to agitate. I'm an agitator for justice. I want to shake the dirt out of things. And Dr. King said, beware when all men speak well of you. How are you going to change the course unless you go counterculture, unless you broaden the river to let more people in so they can get across? And then I said, what do you think about affirmative action? I cut right to the core. She said, well, it's like they got two jobs left. You got a slightly less qualified black, get the job over a more qualified white, and I don't think that's right. I don't either. Except that's not what we're discussing. Do you know that affirmative action is mostly white women? It's something called Title IX, that all these girls' basketball teams and track and golf on these campuses, it's illegal to just have male sports, that you cannot have boy scholarships without having corresponding girl scholarships, and more women in MBAs and med school and law school. She said, I understand, and people with jobs like yours on this plane? She said, yes. I said, do you understand that affirmative action, if it's Title IX plus Title VII, it is a majority, not a minority issue? And if you had a white female face demanding affirmative action rather than a black male face, we would see it differently. The white men are a little less able to fight their daughters and their mothers and wives than they ought to fight black people. And that's why the right wing positions it as a black issue. And you know that many young white female beneficiaries of affirmative action vote against it because they've been warped by what we have not been taught through mass media. And as she got into it, she'd be, I understand now. Why couldn't she learn this on television? Why was she taught by a Jesse Helms ad with the white hand being pushed by the black hand in North Carolina? Why was she trapped by the Republican leadership? The top leaders, it's lawyers, it's policymakers, who use the alluring white female over Harold Ford to undermine his campaign in Tennessee and take away his Senate seat, which he would have won. I mean, why couldn't she have gotten the truth of that from mass media? The media romanticizes the challenges that would make America great and covers up anecdotes with facts. I said the fact is that we've made progress in civil rights. There's no doubt about that. We now have public accommodations. We now have the right to vote. But just as a strong current, there's a strong undercurrent. And so the dust settles. For blacks and browns, it's high infant mortality and shorter life expectancies. And in between, there's less access to health care and education and jobs and housing and life options. And so we must tell of that story. I'm concerned that the media has the capacity to play a bigger role to make America better. And that's why this idea of media concentration is a bad proposition. We must fight to open up airways for all the people. People with the same information arrive at about the same conclusions. But when GE owns the NBC, the interest in making war materials, and NBC is just a small part of its bottom line, the big part of its propaganda. I say NBC The small part of it's bottom line, but the big part of it's propaganda. When Time Warner owns CNN, a small part of its bottom line, big part of its propaganda. And Disney owns ABC and Viacom owns CBS, and its owner unapologetically endorses Bush for it might affect his tax structure. When the bottom line is interest in the war budget and tax cuts and bonuses and globalization, that legacy of ownership leaves us weaker. And so why can't we fight for tax certificates again to expand the base of leadership and ownership of local media and ethnic-owned media? We're going to fight to revive it again. When television and radio began, as I said, in the 20s, and only white males could get the TV, radios, and then in 48, TVs, only white males could get them by lottery. In 72, we came up with things called cable, and blacks could get them but couldn't get the capital to build them out. Tax certificate came in so we could begin, whites could get a tax deference if they sold to a black or to a brown. More local ownership, more ethnic ownership. When the Gingrich forces came in, the first act was to kill tax certificate. The first act was to kill more local, more ethnic ownership. And that should be Emancipat's first 100 hours, to regain more access to media, more local control. The first 100 hours must include the key to Democrats winning is more access to media. The first act should be more access to ownership of local media. I'm often asked to be on television to describe Michael Richards of the Duke lacrosse, a racial controversy in Durham, North Carolina. But I'm not asked my opinion on the Iraqi Commission report. Most of the people on the commission had never been to Iraq. I met Saddam Hussein and brought Americans out of Iraq and Syria and Cuba and Yugoslavia. And so why pigeonhole me just to respond to a broke-down comedian and not talk about war and peace? Don't just talk about Michael Richards. Talk about the weather Senior Hall on nighttime television 15 years ago. That's what Clinton could do is tell his saxophone act. But now there's no black on nighttime comedy television. But Max Roberts on ABC 20 years ago, now zero. So now Russell, professor from UCLA, says 70% of all roles in Hollywood are for white males, 8.9% for blacks, and 5% for Latinos. A kind of mass media lockout. So you go to CNN and you see these huge pictures of Wolf Blitzer and Paula Zahn and Anderson Cooper and Larry and Nancy Grace and Entertainment Tonight, and you go over and you see O'Reilly and all of that, all day, all night, all white. We have a right because hosts have determined context and subjects, content, guests, bookers, promoters. And so we demand the right to open up access to media. Again, we have retreated in that area. Jesse Jackson discussed Richards and Duke case. I have an opinion about Iraq. And I had an opinion before we got into the mess that we're in now. Bin Laden and Afghan and the Taliban hit us, and then we hit Saddam Hussein in Iraq. It's like a cross-eyed archer. You shoot the wrong target. We've lost lives and money and honor. And so some years ago, when I was running for the presidency, Kissinger was saying responsible foreign policy is that Iran, Israel, and South Africa is our ark of crisis. We must protect Iran at all costs, Israel and South Africa. We have a reason to protect Israel as our ally in the Middle East, but we are protecting them. They're not protecting us. And really they can't. And Iran, as we knew it, the Shah of Iran is gone. And the South Africa, both is gone. And so Kissinger's analysis was wrong. And my analysis was right. But he remains the authority on the subject matter. All these bright leaders will lose 55,000 jobs from Ford Motor Company, 55,000, and bust out Detroit, Dearborn, and Youngstown, Ohio. Is it Americans can't make automobiles better? No, it is that Honda and Toyota can make cars in America, but Americans cannot make cars in Japan. That's the imbalance of trade. When you can buy American-made medicine across the river in Canada, cheaper than you can buy it in Detroit, because of corruption in high places, tell that story, because it's not right and it's not fair. We think that Wall Street is the bastion of individualism and private capitalism, and Wall Street institutions are federally chartered. They get federal tax breaks. Wall Street cannot be off limits to analysis. So when Chris Dodd says he's going to have hearings on Wall Street access and hearings on credit card exploitation and predator exploitation, let's rally behind that which makes sense. This thing called ghetto, called barrio, a structured racial creation for economic exploitation. The ghettos are not poor, they're just broke. The barrios are not poor, they're just broke. They got money, so they can sell to us, but cannot borrow it. They cannot be loaned, but can be bought from. Talk to me, somebody. You can sell to them, but not lend to them. That's why they're broke. They can buy, but they can't borrow. That's why they're broke. Somebody in the news must be able to tell that story. I watched how uncritically romanticized we handled the recent victory lap of November 7th, and then Nancy Pelosi came on, and we're glad that she is now Speaker of the House. We're glad that a woman now holds that position. And we're glad that Bush makes a woman or black more plausible every day. If he can be president twice, almost anybody can be president once. That's my opinion. But apart from the romance of it, when she says, the first 100 days, we're going to have a raise minimum wage, that means nothing to an unemployed person. It's like a person who is don't have any legs and you build him a new track. He needs prosthesis, not a track. We need a jobs plan, something that's bold. We don't need baby steps. We need big strides. We need jobs, skilled trade training, rehab centers for scarred people, infrastructure, affordable health care for every American, housing. We need bold leadership, not baby steps. A plan must correspond with the crisis. The idea of no more interest on tuition is a good thing for those who are in college already. But most cannot get there in the first place. In the first 100 hours, she didn't mention Katrina, which is not just New Orleans. Katrina is a metaphor for abandoned urban America. Stop destroying Iraq and rebuild America. Reinvest in America. Put America back to work. Educate our children. Reinvest in America. reinvest in America, put our children back to school and their parents back to work. She didn't mention Wall Street. Wall Street. $16 billion in bonuses. One end of the island, while the other end of the island called Harlem can't afford to pay its rent for the most part. And yet they're federally chartered institutions. There must not be a plan to green line, red line America. To expand the base, to end redlining. When there are red lines, the red liner cannot grow, the red line cannot develop. We must not bring down these barriers. We didn't know how good baseball could be until everybody could play. In a real sense, the same is true about capital. When we limit it, we don't know how good America really can be for all of its people. Not that long ago, if you will, that Jack Robinson couldn't play baseball. But when he could play it, we went from 13 teams to 32. Inclusion leads to growth. In some real sense, we got to talk about Wall Street because that is the capital. Media concentration comes from capital concentration. Those who got the money buy the media and then control the media, protect their interest in the deal. And then a war budget. Democrats, don't play us light. You can't be against the war and for the war budget. That's like you are against domestic violence. You don't want a man to beat a woman with a belt and then buy him some belts for a present. If you're against the war, let's choose investigation over appropriation. Let's end the war. What happened to the coalition? Where is Britain and Blair now? Where are our Middle Eastern allies now? Where, as the coalition came together to start the war, where are they now? If they ever existed. Free press, you have the power to redeem the soul of America. Keep writing your story. Tell your story. Report your story. You're so important. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word spoke the world into existence. No word, no world. Tell that word. Tell that story. We hear so much nonsense until sense seems not to make sense. But tell it anyhow. In the name of Dr. Martin Luther King, march on anyhow. Build coalitions anyhow. To all the madness, this land is our land. Don't let them break your spirit. They will lie on you sometime. They will try to marginalize you as the lefties sometime. They will say that you're out of step, but keep on marching anyhow. You who are in the legacy of abolitionists, you march anyhow. You who are in the legacy of women suffragettes, you march anyhow. You will fight for racial justice, march on anyhow. You want a healthy environment for our world, you march on anyhow. You care about the coal miners in Appalachia who die from coal miners who die from black lung disease every 6 hours. You march on anyhow. Those who want a one big tent America for all of our children, march on anyhow. Those who want our seniors to have their best years to be their golden years, you write anyhow. Those who are in the pit of life, reach down for them. Those who are in the margins, reach out for them. Those who are seniors, aid them. But somehow, some way, don't lose the faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things unseen. And when we fight and fight the right fight, it may be a long fight or a short fight, but fight the right fight. I would rather lose the right fight than win the wrong one. Let's fight the right fight. Write the story. Tell a story. I know you might get lonesome sometime. The networks are not covering this today, but their spies are here. They know what's going on. They hear the footprints of conscience. They know what's going on. They know that we're going to win this battle. If this room were pitch dark and you would be in darkness and maybe despair, If the room were pitch dark and someone would lit one match, would challenge all the darkness. And so light your match and let it glow. Fill the room with the joy of one light. You are that light. You are that hope. You are that free press. You are the American dream. You are the key to world peace. God bless you and keep hope alive. Repeat, say, stop the war. Save the children. Stop the war. Save the children. Stop the war. Save the children. No more soldiers. No more soldiers. Stop the war. Save the children. Red and yellow. Brown, black, and white. We are all precious in God's sight. Everybody is somebody. The coal miners, the farmers, the factory workers. We are all somebody. Everybody is necessary. Don't let them break your spirit. Don't give up. Keep fighting back. Keep standing up. Keep marching. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Let me hear you scream.